So we covered the deep diving crankbait. That's going to be my #1 choice. That's what I'm going to throw first and foremost. Another big deal is a swim bait, obviously. We talked about earlier gizzard shad, threadfin shad, the #1 forage on these offshore ledges most of the time. So a swim bait, something like a hollow belly swim bait. There's a lot of them on the market. Some of the ones I use, True Bass swim bait. I'm sponsored by Live Target. They make some really good hollow belly swim baits. They're real lifelike, very realistic. Been playing around with them some. Scottsboro Tackle makes a really good swim bait. All these work really well, and they all have their own kind of place, and it's kind of whatever you like. It's all about tail kick. It's all about body roll. Probably my favorite one is still just the old school Bastrix. Bastrix was kind of the first and foremost one that everybody used, and it's probably still one of the best, honestly. What size head to throw on your swim bait? Let's talk about first when to throw the swim bait as opposed to the crankbait. When I see those fish sitting up in the water column, I want them right down on the bottom when I'm throwing that crankbait. But if I see a school of fish and they're kind of stacked, and I see some, say they're sitting in 20 feet of water, and I see some sitting up in 12, 15 feet, that's when I'm going to throw this swim bait, because I can keep it up high. I can throw it out there, I can count it down, and I can wind it right through that school of fish. 1/2 ounce to a 1 ounce head is what I use most of the time. It just depends on the current. It depends on the depth. It depends on your line size. It depends on a lot of different things. If I had one size to choose 90% of the time, probably that I use is a 3/4 ounce head. And somewhere along the lines of a 5.5 to a 6-inch swim bait. That's what I'm going to use most of the time. I throw it on my 7'4" Mustad Instinct bait casting rod, 7-to-1 reel. That's what I like. You can get by with a 6-to-1. You can get by with an 8-to-1, but I find that 7-to-1 is that sweet spot. And that's what I really like. That's where I like to be. So, you know, like I said, a lot of different hollow bellies on the market. Just pick the one that you like, that you have the most confidence in. And when it comes to colors, don't get real carried away with colors. If you've got a little bit of color in the water, go with something with a little bit of chartreuse in it, like a citrus shad type of a color. And, you know, any other time, if that water's clear, go with something that looks like a threadfin shad, looks like a gizzard shad, you'll be good to go. A hair jig. This is one that has kind of always been intriguing to me. I can remember a tournament that we fished 2015, I believe it was. I was into my career a year. I had played around with ledge fishing a little bit. I knew how to find schools a little bit, and I made a top 10 at Kentucky Lake. And the final day I was fishing next to Kevin VanDam, and I saw him absolutely put on a clinic with the hair jig. And that's what really kind of brought the hair jig to light, honestly. There had been guys on the Tennessee River that had just been raping them on a hair jig for a long time. And I hadn't heard about it. I hadn't jumped on board. So I immediately came home from that tournament. I called up my buddy down at Pickwick Lake, and I was like, hey man, I want to go next week. I want to learn how to fish this hair jig. So I ordered some. I went down there, and sure enough, I learned how to fish that hair jig. Had one of the best days I've ever had fishing offshore. And that was before a lot of those fish had seen it. A lot of fish have seen it now, but it's still a deadly way to catch them. My favorite hair jig is made by True Bass. It's called the Shuttlecock. It was actually designed by a good friend of mine on Pickwick named David Allen. And it kind of had a cult-like following for a while. He was making them in his garage. And the only guys that could really get their hands on them were guys that kind of knew him. I know Jordan Lee, he did really well in the tournament at Kissimmee Chain, of all places, on it. There were several guys in TVA tournaments. You'd see it pop up. But David was actually tying them in his garage, and then he hooked up with Ryan Salzman over at True Bass, and they put the True Bass name on it. But David's a good friend of mine, and I'm gonna be honest with you, when it comes to head design, the amount of hair, the hook that he put in that thing, it's dialed in, man. It's the best hair jig I've ever thrown. It's my favorite one.